Coming up on Mountain Hermeneutics, we've all watched that sporting event where the boxer or the football player had the microphone shoved in his face after the event and said, I did this all because of Jesus. He gave me the power to do this, and all praise be to God. Well, in practical senses, what does that even mean? You're listening to Mount Hermeneutics, where three Marines give their perspective on God, faith, and spirituality with a heavy lean on the divine council worldview. This is not your grandma's Sunday school, nor is it always for the Christian faint of heart. Nothing about who we are or what we say make us experts. But you better believe we'll have a take, and perhaps it won't suck.
You guys have been friends so long and you don't know what his eschatological view is?
I don't know what anybody's eschatological view is because I hate eschatology, which is part of the
That's the first thing I ask people when I meet them. If I can't already tell, that is.
That could be a reason why you're single.
Normally, you know what? The right one will have the right eschatology.
Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube, simply by searching for Mount Hermeneutics. So please subscribe wherever it is that you are listening or watching this show, and share it and all that stuff. If this is your first time with us, I am Andre. My two co-hosts, Matt and Brian. Fellas, what's happening?
So,
gentlemen.
All right.
We're all caught up now.
Yeah, that's what's happening.
That's what's happening now. Now.
I feel like we're really bad at that handoff.
You think after a year we'd be good at that handoff? It would be.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, well, when we, yeah, I think so. You think so? So, what's going on, guys?
Not a whole lot. Actually, I take that back. It's actually been a super busy week for me. I was traveling for work. Tuesday, Wednesday, came home Wednesday. My dad was in town. So he was here Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then he just left. So we had a lot of family dinners and, trying to spend some time together. So between travel and then family, I've actually been super, super busy. Today's been my first day kind of just back at it. So happy to be here.
All
right. Sports wise, it's been a terrible week. In my side of the world, the Titans are like 0-400 and the Sooners continue to lose. So it's been rough. Good news is they fired their offensive coordinator. So, that's a move. Something had to happen. I don't know that was necessarily the right thing, but it was a thing and something had to happen. So somebody's got to get blamed. Yeah. Other than that, I think it's clear that God is not an OU Sooners fan.
Ooh, yeah. He is a Dodgers fan, though. So as the Dodgers and Yankees go to the World Series the way God intended it always to be, it's always New York versus Los Angeles. So last night the Dodgers clinched the National League pennant, and there was probably not a bigger Dodger fan than me, and so that's pretty good. Of course, all my praying worked out.
Of course it did. And I'm glad. I'm sure Otani's glad that you were praying. Yeah. Obviously, just his skill and that all of the hard work that they put into it wouldn't have come to fruition if your prayers hadn't been answered.
I mean, obviously.
That's a pretty heavy. That's quite a bit of sarcasm that we're laying all over this. Yeah, the show transition.
F you guys.
I was gonna say, like, I never pray for sports ball, so I'm often at a loss of how anybody wins.
Right. So what we need to do, Brian, is we need to get you praying for our teams.
Without your favor and
exactly.
Christ favors you, Brian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the whole trick. He's going to get Brian praying for the Dodgers and the Spurs and not the Lakers. And
Yeah, I don't think it's ever going to happen, guys. Sorry. I can't bring myself to do it.
Those Mets fans, those heathens in New York.
Clearly, their prayers weren't answered.
Their prayers were not answered. And But apparently New York likes the pinstripe guys. I mean, God, he likes that side of New York.
I like
Or
to
he just hates Cleveland.
I like
Maybe
to
that's
think that, God, in the way he designs the systems to work, there has to be a shadow to offset the light.
Mm, I see. Yeah, I think you're onto something.
And I'm perfectly comfortable assuming that the Yankees are the embodiment of Satan and all that is evil in the world. And so anytime they win, it is a punishment and or a retribution on the good people of the world.
Oh man, so you think maybe it's linked to politics? Like if the Democrats win, the Yankees will win?
Something
Like you
like
said?
that. Yeah.
Even though Dodgers are Hollywood, I don't even know who's the good guy here.
Right.
I
Like
don't even
I'm so confused. My brain's like a pretzel at this point.
this
So
is all bad. Entertainment is horrible.
so for anybody that's trying to follow the bouncing ball and understand what we're trying to set up,
Like me.
Dre and I might be doing a ham-fisted, sarcastic, facetious overlay to kind of intro the show today. So one of the things that we've talked about a lot and kind of started our conversations tend to touch on this, but we've never actually focused an entire show on it, is um, people, Christians, having opinions or thoughts about how and what the outcomes of prayer and what God is affecting and not affecting and those kinds of things, right? So if one says, hey, I'm praying for this thing, I'm praying for this new job, I'm praying for this thing to happen, and then it does, it's really easy to say, hey, my prayers were answered. But then the flip side of that has to also exist that says, hey, then when they don't happen, my prayers were not answered. So then does that mean that it's actively against, or was it simply passively not for? And then that sets up a whole nother conversation point around is everything active with regards to divine interaction and divine will, or are there things that happen outside of divine will and not? So that's one angle of where we're probably going to get into in this conversation. Dre, any other ways you want to spin that?
Um, no, I think you hit it. I do think though um that there is something to be said to rely on God and not rely on, your own human faculties or material items or your own understanding of how things work in the world. And prayer is certainly part of that. Um, I I think it's probably more along the lines of, humans are relational creatures. So, and if you have a strong relationship with God, then I think things will work out more than it won't.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, I so I've been in a lot of conversations with Christians, and this topic comes up a lot. And I have this weird dual opinion on it. So I kind of come at this with two different thoughts at the same time. And I don't honestly know how to reconcile them, so I'm actually excited for this conversation. Because I agree with you. I agree with what you just said about um, reliance upon God. I mean, he tells us to. It's pretty clear that the Bible's very clear on, don't rely on yourself, don't rely on the world, don't rely on material things. Trust in God, rely on God, pray to God, all of those kinds of things. But there's certainly another side to that coin throughout all of the parables. I mean, Jesus taught about them over and over and over again. Um, where a person is supposed to be diligent and work hard. I think just last episode, Brian, did a really thorough job of explaining, seeking to improve yourself and to become, the arete and all of those.
Participation in the divine nature.
Right. Sanctification was the kind of the catchphrase you were using. So it's kind of funny to me. It seems almost counterintuitive or opposed to say on one hand to do everything you can to get better at these things, to be more virtuous, just at a high level, but then to say, but don't lean on anything that's worldly, which includes yourself and the power and the strength of mankind, of your human nature. So, like, I don't know. I feel like there's this weird tension between those two concepts that seem to be opposed. Are they not? Are they? Like, Brian?
Um, when they're kind of laid out in the abstract, yeah, there's a tension, but normally these things, like, we can sort of, look at them in a narrative and see what that means in practical terms. Like the Dre, you shared a meme in our chat group as kind of the basis for this episode, and it cited some verses. One of them was Second Chronicles 13. I forgot the actual verse. I'm looking it up. I have the chapter in front of me, but 13:18. So this is the battle. Now Jeroboam had set troops around to the rear, so that while he was in front of Judah, the ambush was behind them. Judah turned and saw they were being attacked at both front and rear. Then they cried out to the Lord. The priests blew their trumpets, and the men of Judah raised the battle cry. At the sound of their battle cry, God routed Jeroboam and all Israel before Abijah and Judah. The Israelites fled before Judah, and God delivered them into their hands. Abijah and his troops inflicted heavy losses on them, so that there were 500,000 casualties among Israel's able men. So there's a civil war between Judah and Israel, in case you guys didn't pick up on that. The Israelites were subdued on that occasion, and the people of Judah were victorious because they relied on the Lord, the God of their ancestors. They still fought.
Right. It wasn't like they just sat down and were like, hey, we don't have to fight because God's going to win for us.
Yeah. And there is, it does matter to consider, well, we kind of talk about reliance upon God in a kind of a vague sentimental sense. In the Bible, with the people of Israel, like, this was a very, we might miss the astonishing strangeness of this because we're so familiar with it, but like the idea of God entering into history to make a covenant with mortals was like a totally novel idea. So this idea, this notion that Israel as his people, or Judah as his people in this case, could count on God to intervene in kind of practical, delineated ways according to the law. Well, that was kind of a unique thing for them. We don't quite have the same promises given to us as Christians. We're under a different covenant. But the general principles are still there. Them relying on God was conditional upon. I just happened to read Psalm 119 today, and it's all about, like, the psalmist is praising the word of God as for its guidance, for being a lamp unto his feet. Studying the law makes him wiser than his elders. It's a pretty lengthy psalm, and it I didn't plan to read that today. It was just I go through the Psalms. I read typically one a day, like every day, as the kind of the intro to my whatever other Bible study I do. Today was Psalm 119, and it just it fit with this topic so well that it's sort of, relying on God is not something that you do in the moment when you're in a battle and you need help and you say, Lord, help me. It's a lifelong thing. You build your life according to the values that he teaches. You set your priorities and your expectations and according to his teachings, and then you're in a position to ask him those things. And so I think I don't remember what the question was, but I think I made a point in there somewhere.
No, I get it. Dre, any other thoughts on that?
No, I think I will as we move along.
Yeah. It's it strikes me that where I think the problem comes into this and why it's so confusing is it's not so much the reliance on, because I think you're kind of in there, Brian. Like at some level, there's an expectation that we're doing stuff, right? Like there's an expectation that we're an active participant in this world that we live in. Um, the reliance, I think, is on the big picture, or the kind of the main thrust of what it is we're trying to do. It's not the small things. So what's an example that I could use to go back to Dre's intro? And we were talking about sports people, and I know, Brian, you're not as big a sports guy, but you've seen it in boxing or whatever, where the guy wins, and then the first thing he says when they stick the camera, like, what do you want to say about your win? And he's like, first of all, I got to thank God. Through all things this is possible. I want to thank my wife, I want to thank my trainer, right? They kind of go down their path. I think the problem is that the idea behind God being involved or being enabling or whatever wasn't about winning. I think it's about our gifts, right? Our spiritual gifts and what we're on this planet to accomplish and to do. And then how do we use those in furtherance of the kingdom of heaven, right? And a guy winning a sports match because he's a really good sports guy means nothing if he doesn't use that platform to further the kingdom, right? And simply saying God caused me to win doesn't further the kingdom. But specifically, and these guys don't mean as much to you, Brian, so, but to sports people, guys like CJ Stroud or Harrison Butker, who are using their celebrity status to actually say something meaningful into broad culture, I think is a step closer to the right direction, right? Somebody, we always like to lampoon celebrities when they want to talk about politics, right? Because it's like, dude, you make movies for a living. Why should I listen to you about who to vote for president? But if a celebrity was to speak up and say, hey, I want to talk about child endangerment, that's a pretty interesting way to use your platform, and it doesn't necessarily get you your next gig, right? In fact, you might not get gigs because of it, but you're using what you've been able to amass through your God-given talents to do something that's useful and positive. And I think that would be something that I would tend to be a little more in favor of, I guess, is my thought.
Yeah, I mean, I know who Harrison Butker is. He's the guy who leftists hate because they think he's a misogynist because
Right.
he said he loves his wife and
Right.
is grateful that she
Wants
raises
to
their
raise a
kids.
family. Yeah.
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 Oh no.
What a
Which
piece of dirt.
which yeah. So I, this this doesn't exactly follow that exact point, but the overall topic. I want to read something real quick, if you guys will indulge me. And
Why not?
there's a point here. Um, I rejoice greatly in the Lord that at last you renewed your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned, but you had no opportunity to show it. I'm not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. That is Philippians 4:10 through 13. And so
And most
that,
people will know that last sentence as one of the
right.
most often ill-cited and
Yeah,
misused verses, right?
the reason I bring that up is that you're talking about sports and trusting in God. About a million years ago, when I was in college, I was at a Bible study. One of the elders at my church had the college age Bible study at his house. I went to the bathroom, and he hanging on the wall was a it was a silhouette of a guy like swinging a golf club, and it had that verse
Hmm.
underneath. And which, taking that, in the context in which Paul wrote it, he was in prison. Um, getting beaten up and
Straight up
deprived,
not
and
having a good time.
yeah, and who knows if he's going to get executed. And here in Oklahoma, USA, we're citing that to hit a golf club. And so I washed my hands and finished, and I went out and I just totally just roasted the guy whose house we were at, and I don't regret it. And he agreed with me. He was like, "Yeah, it is pretty stupid."
Well, it's a real common one in the weightlifting circles. You see it a lot with like the weights on it and stuff, right? And
Yeah.
you know, um, but I feel like I think I've talked about this before. Um, I worked with the corporate CIO of General Dynamics. I was doing some projects with him, and a really smart guy, very experienced senior guy. Obviously, GD is a huge company, and this guy was, he was a big dude. He would anytime he would walk past a casual employee, he would ask him what they did to increase the stock value of the company, right? And and I feel like that's the kind of question that if you're, you know, giving God the shout out, and it's like, okay, how did winning this boxing match, how did it increase the stock value of God's of the kingdom, right? And
Yeah.
that I think would be the more pertinent way to kind of wrap that question back around, and not to, and I don't suggest this to be a jerk to these guys that are, taking these. At least they have the guts to say they worship God, which is more than
Yeah.
a lot of Christians would do if the
Wh-
camera was stuck in their face.
which sometimes that's all it does mean. Like guys, like, hey, without my faith, I probably wouldn't have the strength to get up every morning and work out. And you know, I do think that, first of all, I think they're all sincere when they say it. I
I
mean,
think they are.
I don't
Sure.
know them personally, but I think that they honestly believe that if it wasn't for God, they wouldn't be in the position that they're in. And I think to many degrees they are correct. Um, I kind of see it as, when they remember when we ran our MLM circles, Matt, and then
Hmm.
to be successful, you have to know your why.
Hmm.
Okay, what's your why? And I think that uh, when you worship God on your heart, then you do a lot of things differently. I mean, for example, like, I'm a father. I'm absolutely obligated to feed my child and clothe them and give them a roof over their head. And I don't do that stuff, or I don't love them because I do that stuff, right? I do that stuff because I love them. And there's the subtle difference. I'm a Dodger fan and I like when they win, but I don't like them because they win.
Yeah.
I want them to win because I'm a big fan of them. And I think that, you know, that's kind of how faith is. You do those things because you have a trust in the Lord, that trust is everything that was said in those scriptures is going to come true. Therefore, you live your life that way. You don't live your life to obtain the things they said. You believe the stuff they said, and that's why you do those
It
things.
goes back to, I know we talked about this, but it's been a few episodes. But the Beatitudes from the Sermon
Right.
on the Mount, right? Blessed are the meek, blessed are the peacekeepers, right? All the things that he was saying, blessed are. You don't do those things and then become saved. Like, you become
Right.
those things because you are saved and you are changed, and then your spiritual gifts and the change within you allows you to start incrementally being more of those things that are good, right? Same kind of deal. All of those were hard things to do individually, but then to do them all together is like, yeah, right. Come on, like, who can do all those things, right?
Mhm.
Like that would be the goal, right? Back to, Brian's sanctification of, the path of the arete. Like, I feel like that's some kind of like some path up into some Tibetan monastery or something, right?
Arate, I feel like it's a title for an anime like Naruto.
Or Kumite or whatever, right?
It's Greek. It's
Round
Greek
one,
word.
fight.
Fight.
But yeah, I think I definitely think that's there, and I agree with you, Dre. I don't think these athletes or these celebrities are being insincere. I don't know that they've really thought through what they're trying to say and do, right? Other than it being a public proclamation. And I guess if it was nothing more, it's not the worst thing,
Sure.
Yeah,
right?
and I don't want to sound like I'm you know, like you guys, I appreciate them being willing to express their faith publicly. And anyone who acknowledges me before man, I will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. Anyone who denies me before man or is ashamed of me, my words, I will be ashamed of when the Son of Man comes in his Father's glory with his angels. So yeah, if you're on a public platform and you are willing to identify with Jesus Christ, I can only celebrate that. But yeah, there is kind of the impression that um that the actor gets up and thanks God for his Oscar or for that movie he did with all of the gratuitous sex and violence and
Exactly.
um not that I'm opposed to sex and violence in movies. It's the gratuitous
It's
part
got to be
that I
tasteful.
got to be tasteful.
It's
It's got
important.
to advance the plot. But one could get the impression that I think of the opening chapter of Job where you know have you considered my servant Job? Well, and the Satan answers him, well, of course he praises you. You hedge him in. You take away all of your blessings and he'll curse you to your face. One could get the impression that people, they pray to God and they go to church as this sort of superstitious way of getting things. And there are actual theologies that teach that. The prosperity gospel
Hmm.
is very much if you believe hard enough, God's going to just shower riches upon you from heaven. And the fact that you're not rich, that you're ill, that means your faith isn't strong enough. I don't think that's the majority of believers, but that is a thing that people believe. And so it does bear some examination of, well, what is that? When it tells us to rely on the Lord, what does that mean in practical terms? Rely on him for what? What is the promise? And how do you know if you're doing that? And if things aren't going your way, does that necessarily mean you're not relying on the Lord or he's not blessing you? And I think I think that those are the kinds of questions you guys were wanting to explore here.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. So I always go back to John chapter 6 because it's so illustrative of a lot of these issues. It's where he fed the 5,000 with the five loaves. So they wanted to make him king by force, and so they rightly understood that's the king, that's the Messiah. Um, but he didn't want to be made king by force, so he took off. He crossed the Sea of Galilee. They caught up with them, and he says to them, "I tell you the truth, you're looking for me not because you saw the signs, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill." Like they weren't. Often people, we make God or Jesus an accessory to our lives. We come to God for what we expect He's going to do for us. It's not rather than making Him the center of our lives, joining His cause, and that makes all the difference. I mean, if you're trying to make him king by force because he's given away free lunches, it's not really faith. If
Right.
you might believe absolutely that becoming a Christian means you get the free lunches, but if you're joining for things that he did not promise, then your faith is misplaced.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point because what you don't hear very often is people praising God when they're having a bad time.
Yeah,
you know.
I'm saying,
And
I,
I'm just as
I'm
guilty,
no
right?
better.
Like, yeah, I don't necessarily sit down and I it's not your instinct to go to God in a praise, in prayerful praise whenever you're going through it. Right. You're usually going to him with questions and accusations or you're playing let's make a deal, right? Where you're like, hey, so what I got to do to get out of this? Because I don't understand. Um, and it's definitely a different kind of mindset. And they always talk about your friends are always around when it's good, but when you're having a bad time, that's when you really know who your friends are because they're still around. Obviously there's all the old, what the footprints in the sand poem and all that kind of stuff, right? About, he was always there. There's one set of footprints and it was him carrying you and all that. But it's certainly not the way that we become very outward in our conversations. Like I can't ever think of them going to the losing quarterback after the Super Bowl and asking him, and he praised God right out of the gate, right? He's like, they don't.
He said, my God, why have you forsaken me?
Right. Yeah, it's kind of the opposite behavior. And like you said, Brian, nothing changes, right? It's the same situation. So
I will say on that note, so probably the past month, well, I've been on you know the God abides in you, that we're his church, and what that's had me do is notice God in everything that I see, everything that I look at. So when I'm driving down the road, I notice nature more. I see God in all stuff. um and a couple weeks ago, I got in a really bad fight with my wife, and it got kind of ugly. We said things, but what I forgot to do was see God in her. So over the last couple of weeks, honest to goodness, I haven't been angry like at anyone or anybody because when if I just pause and honestly see God in them, then that anger isn't there. There's nothing for me to be mad at. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So basically in a bad time, I am giving gratitude and I am basically praising God, and it alleviates my situation. And that's just something personal I've been going through over the last few weeks, because I went too far with my words and my actions with somebody that I truly care about. And that is something I thought I'd share. Like, and by you saying that we don't pray in the bad times, or we don't praise God,
praise,
give
yeah,
praise to the
yeah.
to God in the bad times, then I think, yeah, not exactly, but I feel like I have been in stressful moments of tension, that I've just like, hey, that guy that just cut me off, am I really mad? And if I see God in him, then I'm no longer angry that he cut me off. Things just raise off of me, and I think that is kind of a personal strength through God.
I
Hmm.
I don't know precisely what you're talking about, but I think I do. I think I'm close
Uh-huh.
because I think I've talked about this before about, you know, trying to find positive spins to everything that happens
Sure,
versus the negatives. And we're just so programmed to go to the negative. That's what we do. You get a
sure.
flat tire. Oh, that's it. The universe is conspiring against me. I'm under demonic attack. Well, the good news is you didn't have a blowout that flipped you over and spun you into the oncoming lane, and you're not part of a fiery multi crash fatality. That's the upside. The upside is you have towing on your progressive insurance and you don't have to
For
get out
sure.
and get greasy and do all of that, right? There's so many upsides, but we're so ingrained to just go find the worst possible string to pull versus find the positive strings to pull. And I think there's a lot to that, man. And I know that as I've been able to kind of reprogram my brain to work that way, it's just a lot more peaceful.
Right.
I just don't find myself being mad that often.
Um, it kind of that brings me to a certain theological point that I was kind of thought up while we were talking about the topic of the show. I just want to read something real quick. This is Luke 13. Now there were some present at that time. Now there were some present at that time who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. Jesus answered, "Do you think these Galileans were worse sinners than all the other Galileans because they suffered this way? I tell you, no. But unless you repent, you too will all perish. Or those 18 who died when the Tower of Siloam fell on them, do you think they were more guilty than all the others living in Jerusalem? I tell you, no. But unless you repent, you too will all perish." And then he tells a parable about a fig tree in the vineyard, and it's of course it's Jesus. He's making an important point with that, but it's not exactly the point that I'm making with this. But we have this way of taking circumstances personally, like this is God doing this to me, or this is God, good things happening means God is smiling at me. Bad things means God's mad at me, or he's given me over to demons.
Yep.
Here, Jesus is saying, no, it doesn't have anything to do with, those. We're all sinners. We're all in danger of death. Repent, repent, or you too will perish. Of course, everybody eventually perishes, the righteous and the unrighteous. So it doesn't. We can't really read circumstances that way. And I think of this ties back to in Deuteronomy chapter 18, when Moses is kind of given his farewell speech to the Israelites, and he tells them, the nations you will dispossess, listen to those who practice sorcery and divination. But as for you, the Lord your God has not permitted you to do so. Instead, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own brothers. You must listen to him. By sorcery and divination, like he's talking about how, like pagan priests or pagan magicians will, because they worship nature, because they see nature itself as having agency. Like if a storm blows through and wipes out your village, that means Baal or Zeus is mad at you. Or if there's a drought, it means that you haven't.
Or you're about to go embark on a military campaign and you're looking for like some sign that you're going to be favored and you're going to be victorious. Yeah.
Right. And this is predicated. So basically, because nature has agency, you can kind of, it's like those nonverbal communication experts who will like watch an interview and tell you if Kamala is lying or something. But the seers or the sorcerers and diviners would do that with bird sign or entrails or whatever.
Yeah, I saw a sparrow this morning. Every time I see a sparrow, that means
So when Pat Robertson comes on the 700 Club, and he says, this is kind of an old, I'm dating myself. I'm not even sure Pat Robertson is alive anymore, but
I don't think he is.
I've been using this example for so long, I'm not going to stop. But he comes on the 700 Club, and there's a hurricane heading towards Florida, and he looks into the camera and tells all the Christians listening, well, this is proof that God is mad. This is because Disney had their Pride Day, and so God's mad at Florida.
Right.
He's practicing divination. He's calling it prophecy.
That's a hot take, and I like it.
And that's what we do when we try to discern what God's will is based on these circumstances that don't necessarily have anything to do with God. Now,
Pat Robertson was a warlock. You heard it here first.
Also, there was this famous sermon. I forgot the name of the guy who did it. When Benjamin Franklin invented the lightning rod, there was it was a figurative lightning rod. There was all kinds of controversy broke out. He was condemned by all the preachers in the colonies because somebody wrote gosh, I wish I could remember the name of the sermon, but the gist of it was, there had been an earthquake, a really devastating earthquake leading up to that. And this preacher was saying, well, this is God's anger because Benjamin Franklin created the lightning rod to divert God's spear from, hurling it at mortals. And
Some Final Destination stuff going on there.
yeah, so God is making the point that if you're going to rob him of his weapon from above, he'll just use a weapon from below. And it was astonishing to me that's what are you doing, Matt?
Looking it up. It's George. It was George Whitefield.
What's the name of the sermon?
I don't see a name of the sermon specifically, but he was apparently not a fan of old Ben.
That was kind of common, but of course it blew over. And then the irony was that most of the victims of lightning strikes were church bell towers.
That makes sense.
And so lightning would strike because it's a big hunk of metal and burn the church down.
A big conductor stuck up at the highest point in the in the area. Yeah.
And so the lightning rod has saved a lot of churches since then. But yeah,
you're welcome, church.
But instead, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own brothers. You must listen to him. As in, if God has something to communicate with you, he's not going to rely on you discerning the signs from the circumstances. He's not going to
I don't need to check every time I grab a spoonful of alphabet soup to see if there's words in it, or if my grilled cheese has Jesus on it or something. I shouldn't.
Yeah, that's probably not a reliable method, but this isn't exactly the topic, but it's it's related to what it means when we rely on God. If he has something to say, he will say it directly through a prophet. He will reveal it to a prophet or to you directly. But most of what he has to say, he's already said in the Bible. So if you really want to know what God has to say to you, check there first.
If God says something directly to me, doesn't that make me a prophet?
No. If God says something directly to you and says, "Go and deliver this word to my people,"
right? Unless he's telling me a secret, hey, just between you and me, here's this thing. Not a prophet, but if he says, "Here's some stuff, and other people need to know,"
I can with as much certainty as I have about anything that I've ever experienced in my life, I can say that God has spoken to me. He didn't speak to me to give me something to go tell other people on his authority.
So you're not a prophet.
So I'm not a prophet.
Okay.
And I think a lot of Christians would say that God has.
A lot of Christians would say Brian is not a prophet.
That's true. Yeah, I'd say probably unanimously.
I would say there's a consensus. I would say that's probably more true than 97% say there's climate change. I would say.
Now, okay, yeah,
not 100%.
Yeah, it's not 100%. Some
there might be someone like Brian is a prophet.
Yeah,
there's someone listening right now that might
be.
Like, wait, whoa. Are you saying Brian's not a prophet?
There have been people who said, "You're a prophet," and I said, "I'm not a prophet. I'm just reading the Bible."
And they're like, "It's cool, man.
You can just tell me. Just tell me.
I'm with you. I don't mean like I know what you mean. I'm saying I'm with you."
Are you trying to say capiche?
Well, don't do it. It hurts my ears when you do it. So, it's like that. It's like that guy that saw my security clearance and wants to know why I was checking into his office.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, because I got fapped out. I'm just here to, do some NCO stuff.
You should say what that means for the listeners who don't know what fapped out means.
It
does FAP stand for? It's an acronym.
It doesn't mean the same thing.
That's true. Don't go to Urban Dictionary.
Andre didn't go get fapped out at some unit, which would be totally cool, but that didn't happen. It depends on who's doing it. Like,
I think you should just say what it means in military speak, and then we can move on. It
means that I was assigned to another place temporarily. I had a job. I had a new job. I was at one spot, and they're like, "Hey, there's positions to fill over here, and we're obligated to fill it. And they moved me from here to over there, and being that I had a security clearance and I worked in the intelligence field, I went to a supply office, and they wanted to know why I was there. Like, what? Why are you a
So,
supply
Okay.
officer?
so what FAP
I think
stands for is Fleet Assistance Program.
Fleet Assistance Program.
And
There
I
we go.
have to give credit to I went blank on his real name. Maximilian. Terminal Lance was my
Ma-
source just now.
Max
Nice.
Max Uriarty.
Yeah, there you go.
Nice.
Uriarty. Yeah. So thanks, Max.
Okay.
Good, big ups.
Whew. I was gonna have an
So
ulcer if I didn't remember that acronym. So
so reliance on God. I think it's important to rely on him for what he has promised. Is I would
That's an
if I had
interesting.
to sum up my thought.
That's not a bad kind of like bring it back around.
Yeah.
Not rely on him to like pay my mortgage.
Right. And in the Old Testament, his covenant with the people of Israel at Sinai was very much, God would dwell among them. If they hold up their side of the covenant, he's going to hold up his side of the covenant. His side of
Right.
the covenant is he's gonna give them national security and prosperity, and their crops are going to be abundant. Their wombs will be abundant. They'll prosper and be blessed, and they'll be a light to the world, and that other nations can bask in and learn from and learn their ways. If they don't keep his covenant, then it's going to go bad for them. He's going to give them over to their enemies. He's going to send plagues and pestilence and conquerors and invaders, and eventually scatter them to the nations, which is what happened. His covenant with Christians through Jesus Christ it's a very different covenant, and he doesn't promise prosperity and physical security or long life. It's almost inverted. He says, anyone who comes after me must deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Whoever tries to save his life will lose it.
Mhm.
Whoever loses life for my sake will find it. He doesn't promise a trouble-free life. In fact, he promises, if you are faithful to him, you will suffer. You are going to be persecuted. He's not going to inflict it upon you, but we have an enemy.
The world hates us because they hate him.
Right. And
Yeah.
so he doesn't promise to save us from that suffering. He promises that it will all be worth it in the end. Whatever suffering we endure now, whatever we give up now to follow him, whatever we go without or willingly endure, he promises to reward that 1,000-fold at the resurrection. But what he promises now, and this is the passage that I quoted last week. I quote it all the time. His divine power has given us everything needed for life and godliness through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and excellence. Through these, he has given us his very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature and escape the corruption of the world caused by appetites. So it's claiming those promises is how we rely on him, and knowing what those promises are and what their conditions are. That's how we do it, and that's how we grow into Christ-likeness and attain glory. So
Yeah, I dig it.
So there were a couple other verses that you shared in the meme, Dre. Do you want to?
no,
talk about
I
those,
think
or?
I don't think I was hanging on the meme. It was just an idea.
Okay.
We had a short turnaround from last episode, so something quick that we could just kind of speak off the cuff and be personable. I think, and
Right.
just have a conversation.
Yeah. No, I dig all of this. It's funny because every time we when we plan a show and we talk about the topic, I'm always like, I'm going to talk about this and that. Then we get in the show and I never bring up all the things that I was thinking about.
Right. Yeah.
And this one's no different.
I usually write it down and then I have a plan, and then I get mad at you guys because you divert the
We-
plan.
That's the whole point. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Literally the whole point.
Yeah.
No, but I just think this is a cool topic because I think it's also hard to know, at least personally for me. So, my share on this topic is when you are doing life and you're doing your thing, how is a person to know, or should they, or how do you get aware of, is what you're doing ordained / wanted or not, right? So that's kind of a clumsy way to say it.
Like, is God happy with what you're doing?
Yeah. Like, I have what I think I'm aware of as my gifts, what I bring to the table in this world, right? How it seems to me that it's very difficult to know if a person is using them in a useful way or not, right? So we kind of started off just kind of taking shots at athletes saying, I punch people in the face really good. It's because God made me, a badass face puncher. And so I'm doing it. And then I'm going to say thanks to God for punching people in the face and I'm hella rich. Like, that seems like a hard way to kind of wrap around spiritual gifts into, furthering the kingdom of God. But to that end,
I think George Foreman was correct in attributing his face punching to God.
I mean, right. But is
he's
that
probably the exception.
But is that what God wanted him to do, is to punch Muhammad Ali a bunch? Or did he want George to go punch evil people and actually battle
The vigilante.
Right. Like, that's what I'm getting at is doing it in some detached way. I'm trying to be flip and not be flip at the same time, right? Like is it so, using me, just I'll be hyper personal, right? Like I've been, relatively successful in my professional career. I've provided a nice life for my family. I've raised 2 really good kids. I try to be good in the society that I exist in. I give back. I do things, right? Like, we're doing this podcast ostensibly as a way to, further this conversation and to get this message out into people's ears and screens. Is that it? Right? Am I checking the boxes, and when it's all said and done, God's going to give me daps for doing my bit? Or is he going to be like, why weren't you in South Africa, like, being a missionary? I'll be like, what? Missionary?
Yeah, that's something I wrestle with a lot.
Yeah.
Myself. My life didn't turn out the way I envisioned it 20 years ago. And yeah, people often ask me, well, why didn't you go to seminary? And I have reasons that I'm not gonna bore people with, but yeah, I often wonder if, is God gonna be, is God gonna, say to me, well done, good and faithful servant?
Right.
Or is he gonna say, why did you squander the opportunities I gave you?
Exactly.
And I can honestly say, though, that I have sought those answers, and I'm doing the best that I know to do. And I think that, I don't, I don't measure the success of my life by how much money I make or what professional level I achieve. I measure it by what have I done for his kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually something I think about quite a lot. And he hasn't given me those answers, at least not beyond what I'm already doing. But I think just asking the question in earnest and being willing to accept the answer wherever it leads, I think that is if you can say you're doing that, then I think I think that what you're doing is what he wants you to do. And if it's not, he'll tell you, because he has nudged me before. He has said, he has told me specific things to do, and I did them, and it turned out to be rewarding. And I could see afterwards why, what purpose there was in that. But beyond that, he hasn't said, hey, go write this stuff up and nail it on the door of that church or anything to that effect. But
If he ever tells you something like that, let us know, because I'll come
You'll-
video.
okay,
It's going viral.
Right?
This is all of a sudden we're going to be Irvinites or something. It's going to start his own.
don't
his
don't
own.
do that. Don't say that. Don't. Do
I
that.
was saying, dude, Irvinson.
No.
No. You're so humble.
No, I don't. I don't want to.
Brian doesn't say it. Everybody else says it.
They say, sir, you are the best in the drive-through ever. The ice cream
best
machine
fries
never
ever.
works, and you fixed it. I don't know.
I don't want there to be Irvinites. If there are Irvinites, then I will have failed in whatever I was supposed to do. So
my take, Matt,
Mhm.
is, we talked about why we do things,
Mhm.
right? And I think that if your heart and everything that you did for your family is out of love, then I think that God's okay with it. And I think we do a lot of things, to stay out of trouble, right? Like, it's not virtuous that you didn't murder a dude because you're afraid of going to prison, right? It's virtuous that you don't kill people because you honestly love people, right? That's the virtue. It's kind of, going to church it seems a lot of things are ritualistic, where you go and you go through the motions, but why are you doing it? I heard a story about a couple who've been married for a little while, and the wife, she thought that her husband wasn't being romantic anymore, so he kind of took that to heart. And what he did was he locked on a babysitter without her knowing. And the babysitter shows up and she's like, "Oh wow, there's a babysitter. What's that for?" He's like, "Babe, go up there, put your best dress you go on a town with. We're going out tonight." So she comes down this beautiful red dress. They go out to an Italian restaurant where they used to date. And he had the live music playing the songs. They talked and discussed about things that they used to laugh about, and she had a great time. Her favorite flower in the world is a blue rose. He pulled one of those out, and they just had a great night. And for like the rest of the week, they were awesome in their relationship. Well, the very next Tuesday, same thing. Girl comes, babysit. He said, "Go put a dress on." She's like, "It's kind of the same thing." Okay. They go to the exact same restaurant, the exact same music plays, the exact same rose gets pulled out. And then it starts becoming like Groundhog Day, where you kind of lost the plot on
Mhm.
why
Mhm.
you were acting like that. And
Mhm.
he does this for weeks on it. And then if you ask him, like, yeah, our marriage is great, because but if you
Mhm.
ask her, her tears of joy is no longer tears of joy. Now
Mhm.
it's tears of frustration. And I think that a lot of Christians ritualistically kind of go through the motions of going to church and doing that thing because they're checking the box to make whatever happy or whoever happy. Um,
Mm.
we don't feed our kids because we're afraid of going to prison. We feed our kids because we genuinely love them.
Mhm.
So I think, I mean,
Most of the time.
yeah, right. I mean, hey, I think you didn't do all those things only to have a dope house with a pool, right? And maybe you did, and
100%.
maybe
No. Like
so
it's funny. Like for me, it's all been like I might not have told this story on this show. So my professional career had like a very specific point in time when it became like a big career, to where I knew I was going to I'd kind of made it, and it all stemmed from Carrie having Austin and not wanting to go back to work. So I'll tell the story quickly. So Carrie and I first got together, had Alyssa early. Um, I kind of told Carrie right up front, like, I'm like, hey, I'd love it if you were a stay-at-home mom and raised kids. And she was like, that'll never happen. I'm always going to pull my own weight. I've worked. I'm strong, independent queen, whatever. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. So we had Alyssa. We were young, military, had like no free time, because you're rushing. It's that whole thing, right? We had to rush to work, rush to daycare. Um, Carrie had a moment that she tells the story now that she took a day off early to go get Alyssa from school. And when she went to get Alyssa, they thought Carrie was the babysitter because our babysitter had been the one picking Alyssa up from school. And they thought that was her mom. And
Ooh, ooh.
that doesn't sit with moms well, right?
Right.
And so she had been internalizing that. And then she got pregnant with Austin. And after we had Austin, we had the two kids. So we weren't going to have any more kids. So that second one, the postpartum hit a different kind of way. And I tell the story. I came home from work one night and we're having dinner, and Carrie started crying and said, I'm not going back to work. Would you pass the peas? And I was like, you're what? You're not going back to work? I'm like, we live in the Northern Virginia, Southern Maryland, DC area. Like, I don't make that kind of money. You have to work. And she's like, I'm not. Like, we can go to Oklahoma. My parents have 5 acres of land that's mine. We can get a mobile home and put on it and live. And I was like, I've heard your offer. Give me some time to come up with a counter offer, right? So I went to my company and I was like, hey, I've got to move. Here's the thing. We got to move near Oklahoma, get my kids, near grandparents and family and this and that. And because of all of that, my boss took me down to a different boss who gave me a job that was a promotion that I didn't think I qualified for. And he was like, oh, yeah, we'll just put you in this role and give you a promotion and send you down here. And then I moved and the job went really well. And then I got promoted again and again. And so my whole career pathing, I can tie it back to that one day that I made this family first decision. And I love that story because, to the point of what you said, Dre, my career was never fabricated, or I didn't sit down and like, I'm going to do this and then get promoted. Then I'm going to go here and do this for 2 years, then go do that. I was literally, just making decisions in the moment that I thought were the right things to do. And it worked out really well. And I love that the most about my career. I didn't step on anybody's neck or stick a knife in anybody's back to get where I got. And I don't even know if I could do it all over again because I'm not entirely sure of the pathing that happened to get me
Right.
from here to there, from here to there.
You couldn't draw it up. It just,
Yeah. It just kind of happened.
got there.
But I do feel good that I did it the right way versus, contriving a career. And so, like I said, I love that story because I like to bring in the potential for divine providence, or, the fact that I was just doing it for the right reasons and I was rewarded for it. Or just, I was lucky,
Yeah,
we can just call it that. It's like, it's whatever.
I have things like that happen that convince, like, when I kind of look at my life and think, what am I doing? What is this? Why am I here right now in this place? But then I kind of look back at these circumstances that just kind of fell out, like just the right conversation at the right time. I heard about this job that was open. I applied, and it was right after I had this kind of climactic sort of conclusion to this part of my career that I couldn't have planned for. And it sounds extremely vague, but I had one job as a reporter. I was fired under very unjust conditions, under very unjust circumstances. Wound up a few years later being the editor of this other paper. Just a random word to my publisher, and the guy who unjustly fired me, as it turns out, was printing the paper that I worked at, and but he had reneged on a deal and he owed us like hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is a really vague story, and I'm trying to like give you the high points, but they lack drama and meaning because I'm not giving you the background. But um, anyway, the guy who unjustly fired me lost his company because of like me just accidentally, spilling. God took vengeance on my enemies, is my point. And then, and I'm like, it sounds dramatic, but
And you don't want any Irvinites.
it's kind of what happened.
You,
And then this other job opportunity opened up that paid like 3 times what I was making, and I took it, and here I am. But yeah, I kind of look back at stuff like that, and I'm like, oh well, I don't, God has certainly, he's vindicated me in those things, and now he has me here for a reason. So, but I don't know.
I, I I honestly think that it's just we're such relational creatures. I think that if you have a relationship with your family and you have a relationship with a spouse and you kind of just pour yourself into those things, then if God is in everything, then you poured yourself in a godlike way. I think that I think it's one of the trouble with marriages these days is because people are just using marriage as a bolt on to your life, right? Like I can't get married until
Interesting.
I've established this stuff, and then I'll just take on a wife, and then we'll live happily ever after. When really you're supposed to become one person, you're supposed to take on all of that. They're in you, and you're in them. So
Yeah.
you know, so I think that if you have a relationship with God and take the same approach that your relationship is familial, like that's your father. We are children, brothers in Christ, right? There's a reason why we're all called brothers and sisters, not because it's kind of a cordial thing, but we're all brothers and sisters in the kingdom of God. Um, I
Yeah, and that kind of just the way you worded that, about God being in everything. I kind of like I submit like possibly a different way to think about it. And I thought about this when I was told you guys I was watching The Last Kingdom, and there was this scene where Uhtred and Alfred are having their last conversation, and Alfred is kind of unloading to Uhtred that he's on his deathbed. He knows he's about to die. And he's telling Uhtred how he's afraid all of his work will come to nothing, and like because if England doesn't unite under his son, then everything he's done won't have mattered. And Uhtred responds, well, it's not up to us, it's up to God or the gods. And it kind of ties back to that whole divination thing. Like we kind of have this pagan way of thinking about our relationship to God. The way we tend to think of ourselves as these kind of chess pieces that God is moving around in the board, and we're just kind of praying that he moves the pieces in our favor and moves us where we want to be. But I don't think that's quite right. I think that I go back to Genesis 1 a lot because I think this is a really important. I mean, it's the first chapter in the Bible, and I think there's a lot more going on there. Like the whole thing is built on that, where you get the entire kind of blueprint of God's purposes for creation, where it says that he created man in his image. Well, the image of a God is an idol. Like that's how like the pagan mindset
Sure.
is, a temple is a microcosm of the world, and the idol in the temple represents that God ruling over the world. So if you're in the ancient world and you're aware of this, and then you read the book of Genesis about how God is ordering creation, and then he sets and then he sets man up as the pinnacle of creation, and he makes man in his image. Well, that, that automatically indicates, well, man is God's idol. Not that he idolizes us, but we are his representative in the world. So it's kind of like God's plan is to rule the world, is to rule creation through us. That's plan A. Plan B, we fell, and now we fell under the authority of the serpent and the watchers, and now it's the church's role through the church. God is bringing it back, but it's still God in us. It's not that God is in everything, it's that God is in us to exert his will in everything. And so as long as we're doing that, as long as we're carrying out that role, and the church is that role restored, because God's spirit dwells in us, and so it's God doing it through us. As long as we're doing that, we can rely on him to move the chessboard the way we need him to. But the fundamental thing is to understand ourselves in those terms. We are made in his image. We're his agents in the world. And so, do that, and we can rely on him to, maybe to fight our battles the way the Israelites relied on him to, or to, have us speak to the right enemy and resurrect us after we're killed. But
yeah, it's interesting when your idol metaphor, or whatever that's the right terminology is. I've always kind of focused on that more of the golem kind of thing, right? Because the whole coming out of the dirt, the clay, and then breathing life into us, and it kind of fits the older Jewish mythology of those inanimate objects that can be animated, but kind of same at the end of the day.
Yeah, the golem was a medieval Jewish idea where they would make they would make a human figure out of clay, much as Adam was made by God out of the dust of the earth,
right,
to serve as a protector when they're under persecution.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of parallels between that and the American superhero.
Okay.
Like all of the early, like,
of course there is.
Yeah.
well, it's there. I mean, there's been a lot of scholarship on that. Like most of the early comic book creators, Jerry Siegel, Joe Shuster, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Joe Simon. I can go on and on.
Easy, Kanye. I know what you're about to say.
He's just listening, people.
Oh, we lost Dre. You froze up there, Dre.
Well, it doesn't matter.
But yeah, so I think that's all that's all the thoughts I have on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you think? What does strength through God mean to you? Leave it in the comments, or send us an email, or just call me. Just say, no, you're an idiot. Shut up. That's not what that means.
Call me.
Why aren't you calling? Why aren't you calling? But yeah, that's let us know what you think about this whole episode, and if there's something we missed, and we'd love to hear it. We'd love to debate you, or we'd love to agree with you because you agree with us, which is the smart thing anyway. Final thoughts, anybody?
I'm tapped out.
No, I don't think
Okay.
I don't think I have any.
Very cool then. Well, in that case, I will say stay curious, stay enlightened, and we will see you next week. God bless.